Welcome to Education Now. I'm your host, David Jefferson Jr. And as always, we're glad to have you with us, and we're glad that you've joined us on today. Then Sancha K.Gray, who is the Superintendent of Schools for the Asbury Park School District. And for those of you who do not know, Asbury Park School District, which is based in New Jersey, is...
We are one of the gems by the shore, Asbury Park Schools. We are a rapidly growing school district in terms of our literacy growth and achievement. And I'm so delighted that you are taking the time, Dr. David Jefferson, to just spotlight our district and the great work that we are engaged in. We're nowhere where we want to be, but we are making steady, small, incremental gains.
Certainly. And for the audience, I want you to know we're taping this on May 17th, 2020. And the reality is the situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has struck not only our country, but the world with a blind side. It has shifted the regularity of life as we know it. And our overall existence has changed, and it is ever changing, to say the least. And there's a lot going on as it relates to distance learning and virtual school systems. And so, I want to start with the question, why you to be in this role as the superintendent of schools?
Why not me? is my response. Mm-hmm. I've wanted to be a superintendent long before I even got into education. School, when I was a teenager, wasn't the most exciting, thrilling experience for me. And I went through a lot of different career paths that ultimately led me back into education. I wanted to be an educator and a superintendent because I felt that at the superintendent level, it would allow me to effectuate the most change, right? So it would allow me to create a system for others that I didn't necessarily feel was welcoming to me.
Understood. And I like how you just shared a little bit more about your background there. Tell us a little bit about your history. What brought you to education, if you will?
So I born and raised in Brooklyn. I'm born and raised in Flatbush in Brooklyn, New York. Product of New York City public schools. Didn't really understand a lot of the practices growing up in New York City public schools that I do now as I have now become an educator myself. So I was in my neighborhood school for elementary school, K-5. And before I went to my neighborhood intermediate school, my parents were offered an opportunity to have me bus to a school that was about an hour from my home. And I didn't realize the culture shock there. It was going to be, I was a part of the integration there. So it was myself and another young lady. We were the only two Black girls in the classroom, only two Blacks, period, in the classroom of a bunch, about 27, it was a large class too, of 27 students. And so that began to frame a lot for me, how I understood life outside of my neighborhood school and just understanding the interaction with students. And from there, a more diverse population. And then from there, I went to a gifted and talented junior high school, for which my world became even more broad in terms of being exposed to so many different cultures. So it was in that space and place where I really began to thrive. When I got to high school, not so much. There were a lot of social and emotional mitigating factors there that just didn't allow high school to really be that wonderful experience that I thought it should have been and wanted to be for teenagers. And so I quickly left that space and place to go into college. And from college, I didn't necessarily finish the first go around. I decided to go into wardrobe, hair, and makeup. And so I pursued a career there, ultimately going back to manage a hair salon. During my time in the hair salon, a lot of people would ask me questions because I had more of a scientific approach around hair, understanding it. And they said, wow, you sound like a teacher, like you should teach. And so I was approached oftentimes to teach vocational studies and cosmetology at school. but that wasn't my passion. My passion lied in going into a K-12 space where I felt I would be able to, on a larger continuum, effectuate change. And hence, I went through the process of becoming a teacher, an administrator, and ultimately a superintendent of schools. And so that background really allowed me to understand people, build relationships with people in a different kind of a way than your traditional teaching program allows. And there's nothing wrong with that traditional teaching program. It's just that I was later on, as a mother and a wife, finding myself going back to school and using those experiences that I've had in production work, commercials, and in hair salons to try to bring it all together to create what I like to think of as an experience for children, for teenagers, and for a community of learners.
Once again, with my audience, letting you know we are with Sancha K.Gray, Superintendent of Schools for the Asbury Park School District. You spoke about your background, and it's extremely diverse. I think that's what makes this show powerful, you know, getting the audience to see the diverse background our educators have. And that brings them to the space and the place. How are you doing as a leader of a school district during this time? We care about wellness checks. So even before we get into some deep dialogue, how have you been? How are you doing? How are you personally feeling as you're kind of navigating through this challenging time?
Well, I'll tell you this, with my background being as diverse as it has not prepared me for a global pandemic.
I
I
appreciate
don't
the
know.
honesty.
Yeah, there is no schooling, there is
Right.
no other vocation, there's nothing that I've done in my past that prepares me for the work that I'm engaged in today, except for the faith that I lean on daily to guide me through the things that I have never seen before. So to answer your question, I am well. I'm just blessed that my family is well, my husband, my children, my extended family, we're all well. My school community, we're doing well. You know, it hasn't escaped us in terms of sickness in my district and with my school family, but my biological family as well. We've had a couple of staff members directly impacted, one passing in my district, and so as a school family, we have not been free of any of those ramifications behind the pandemic. However, we are still very blessed and looking forward to continuing to provide the best experience for our children and for our families. So what we've done, when our Commissioner of Education, Dr. Lamont Recollet, tasked us with approaching this global pandemic, and the governor shared that the schools would be closed, the expectation was twofold. We were asked to provide continuous instruction and to provide food security for our food insecure families. And so Asbury Park is a very unique community. We are considered as having the #2 beach in the whole United States. When we talk about diversity, we're talking about economic diversity, cultural diversity, spiritual, I mean, you name it, religious, you name it, we have it all in Asbury Park. But my district is not very diverse. The district that I serve, primarily our students are in poverty. So we are a high poverty district. We are about 55% Black African American and about 44% Hispanic, 1% other. And so not very diverse in that regard. In terms of our class, we are, as I said, a high poverty district, which means we provide everything for our students. And so during this time, we continue to provide meals for our students and their families. We serve meals daily. We serve breakfast, lunch, and a snack is provided. Additionally, there are some wonderful programs in the community, one of which is the Asbury Park Dinner Table, where they provide dinners through 3 locations throughout the city. And so our main objective is to ensure that the basic needs of our families are being met. And Obviously, shelter, we are not able to provide that, but what we can provide in the way of food, we continue to do that. We also try to provide activities and just bring light. I like to use the terms light and life to the darkness of this global pandemic. So on Good Friday, we received a donation from the Fulfilled Food Bank. Kim Guadagno, the former lieutenant governor, she's now the executive director there. She's been fantastic in ensuring that we also send food on the weekends home. So we have shelf-stable food that we provide for our families on the weekends. And for some people, they're probably saying like, wow, this is a school district. You really haven't touched that much on education. But we understand that when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you have to deal with the basic needs first. And if my children and their families are hungry, it doesn't matter what kind of plans we put in place, how many Zoom calls we have with them, it won't matter. It won't matter until we know that those basic needs are being addressed. So we continue to make food security a priority for our students and our families. So now when we get to the instructional piece, we have been engaged in remote learning. We're able to use home instruction, the regulation of home instruction. And what that means for us is we send packets home and our students receive their instruction via packet. Some of our staff go online and they supplement what we send home through social media. So they may do a Facebook Live or Twitter. We have our own YouTube channel. And so you'll see supplements to the instruction on our social media outlets. And the reason why I want to emphasize that is because what this pandemic has done is it has brought to light even more the inequities that are impacting Black, Brown, and Hispanic communities. And in particular, when we talk about those inequities, we're talking about food security, we're talking about digital insecurities as well.
Mm.
And
I don't want to interject because you're really flowing on some powerful points here. That is the first time we've done a number of these interviews here in our first season. I must say that is the first time I have heard someone put it properly. And if you can repeat that, you call it
the digital inequities
Ooh.
That are impacting our Black, Brown, and Hispanic communities.
Yes, and this exposed it. I mean, this really showcased how that chasm of divide is so wide, and there needs to be, some emphasis placed on it. And I heard you share that you all do packets. Now, was your district able to acquire the Chromebooks and those types of devices?
So thank you for asking. Yes, we have Chromebooks. As a school district, we have basically one-to-one devices that our students are able to use in school. And this is where the inequities have really come to bubble up and surface. Okay. For some communities, internet connectivity in the home is just like having breakfast. It's not viewed as a luxury item. For children and families in poverty, it is a luxury item. And this is where the divide becomes even greater. Mm-hmm. This is where we're finding that Black and Brown and Hispanic students lack access. They lack exposure, they lack opportunities that their counterparts in more affluent communities have. And so one of the ways that we have sought to address that in the Asbury Park schools, and I'm so fortunate to have a Board of Education that understands and is willing to address those inequities, is by providing tablets that are Wi-Fi enabled. Good. And so more than just sending a Chromebook home, because basically a Chromebook going into a home or a laptop going into a home that does not have internet connectivity, it's like sending a pen and a paper. It's an alternative, right?
Yeah, correct.
But what we are putting are these Wi-Fi enabled devices into the home. And so now our students can log on, use the Chromebook in tandem with the hotspot, and then do the research and all kinds of interactivity with their teachers that they are able to experience in other communities. So we didn't all have, a lot of time to pivot from a brick and mortar experience
Mhm.
into a remote learning experience. So what this has done for us is it has uncovered those areas where we need to grow and to improve. And that's the key for us now. We are now moving from remote learning into virtual learning. And virtual learning will allow us to provide real time, same time instruction for our students. So we can leave the packets and go into a more virtual digital space.
Once again, we are with Sancha K.Gray, the superintendent of Asbury Park School District. And for those of you who may not know, she is a seasoned educator with over 20 years of experience in serving in her role. But more importantly, she has a calling to see this role as one that is all encompassing. And you touched on something a moment ago that I want to flesh out a little bit and see if we can unpack. Um, it sounded to me like you were talking about community. Schools, right, are often community hubs. And right now, during this time, um, educators are shifting in their role. And our commissioner said it well, Dr. Repollet. He said, it's almost the challenge of trying to gas a flying plane. Um, how have you been able to have your educators kind of reach out to ensure, as you were speaking about, that social emotional learning is taking place as well during this distance time?
So we are apart, but very fortunate to have put in a very comprehensive social and emotional learning component. I know it tends to sound like a buzzword, and oftentimes I wonder if it's just kind of like the word of the expression in education today. But social emotional learning is really how people learn.
Mm.
And there are different supports that districts can put in place. We have restorative practices as a part of our day-to-day operations, if you will. It's a part of the routines in our school district. We also have yoga and mindfulness and meditation that are also parts of the day-to-day functioning in our brick and mortar school. And so what we've done to supplement the learning experience while we've been out of school, some of our teachers and ancillary staff members engage our students in meditation and mindfulness practices. We have a nurse who conducted a meditation and mindfulness moment, not only for our students, but for our parents. When we talk about community, we believe that it's a holistic approach that needs to be employed in Asbury Park schools. It's not enough to just educate the student, but we have to
Mm.
bring the family and the community along in the process, which is why I'm so delighted when we talk about our literacy initiative that has been going on for 5 years under my leadership. It also includes an adult literacy component. It's
Yeah,
extremely important that our parents learn and get the skills and strategies that are needed to be literate and productive.
yeah, I must salute you. Not only in what I understand, if when one goes back and looks at the history of your district, it has not always had the direction it has now. And you all have really done a phenomenal job, and it's been duly noted. But I think what stands out to me is this adult literacy component. You bringing parents to the table, um, and you've been doing this for about 5 years, and we're seeing now that home instruction and assisting parents in student learning is key. So I really want to applaud you for that. What are some of the success stories you've seen come out of that, Sancha?
Well, some of our parents are actually able to gain employment as a result of having participated in our literacy programs. We have monolingual literacy instruction and support. We also have bilingual support, adult literacy programs that work in tandem at our parent center. We have a space in place that's just designated for parents, where we have parent workshops and community partners like the community affairs come in and they provide an instructor and support for our parents. In that space and place, we also have a computer lab. And so we seek to help them bridge that digital divide as well. Because one of the challenges is obviously if our students don't have access in the homes, then again, what bubbles up and comes to the forefront of our attention is how do our parents then understand and access the internet? And what are those things that we can do now that we are apart to get them, to ramp them up, to help them? And so that's where our teachers and our staff members are through social media platforms, because while our parents may not have internet connection, many of them do have a smartphone. And so we're finding that they're very comfortable on apps, and we provide tutorial support so that we can help them through that process.
Very good. This sounds to me like you guys really are providing the resources that are needed. If you could have 3 wishes for your district, and I know that sometimes we don't want to talk about it, but I'm curious. What would those wishes kind of look like? What would it look like if you could just have autonomy to make some major shifts and moves right now? From your vantage point as a leader, what do you see as needed?
Well, I'll tell you what may sound a little bizarre. We have lost $24 million in state aid. And for many people, they would say, wow, these are lemons, and walk away kind of feeling like defeated, feeling hopeless. But I tend to look at it as a opportunity. It's a opportunity because what it has forced us to do is to look at how we can do more with less. It's an opportunity because it's caused us to reimagine, if you will, what our pre-K to 12 experience can be like for children, for families, and for a community. And so I continue to look for partnerships outside of the school district, within the community. We have wonderful relationships with our Chamber of Commerce and some local nonprofits. And so what we continue to do is look at expanding our borders in the sense of looking beyond the walls of the classroom. And we look at our city and even in the county, and sometimes to a lesser degree, but still to some degree, the state, as the classroom, as an extension of the classroom for which our students are able to thrive. And so when I think about your question, I think about it and I frame it within the context of real life, my real life current reality. And my current reality is really looking for those deeper partnerships where our students continue to have exposures outside of the classroom that continue to support our moral imperative. And our moral imperative is to ensure that our students are at 18, 19, or 20, when they graduate and leave us, that they are college or career ready. So those are my wishes, to ensure that we continue to make our students college or career ready by placing them in those externships that are deep, meaningful, and impactful, and that will also create a pathway for them once they leave us.
Once again, we are with Sancha K.Gray, Superintendent of Asbury Park School District, and she just created a new word that I'm going to put into my Rolodex: problemtunity. I mean, right? Is that what you said?
It's a compound. I'm not sure that I should be credited as having authored that.
Okay. All right.
But it is problemtunity.
Okay. I cite that. I'm going to cite you.
Opportunity.
I like that. And with that being said, this dialogue has been centered around a key word, and that's students. Every time I hear you speak, you take it right back to what our district should be focused on, our students. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into what measurement looks like right now. How are you guys able to measure a student's growth from the classroom to the remote environment at this time, or is that there for future opportunity to see? Maybe it's too early to gauge that, but from your perspective as an educator, with the time that you've put in over 20 years, measuring student growth is important.
Yes.
Right. And so with this shift in paradigm, it's going to be a little bit different in how we look at measurement. I know some school districts are a little bit more lenient if things aren't in on time or and they're working with students. But what is it going to look like for you from your leadership perspective in dealing with the measurement of a student's growth? And then even looking at the effectiveness of the educator that is there working with them. Do you have anything?
Absolutely.
I know you
You
do.
know, David, I want to thank you because your questions are so thoughtful.
Hmm.
And when you tend to sit in an interview with someone who's not directly in the education space, you don't necessarily hear questions that get to the core of what's really happening real time. So I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and just your perspective during this interview and bringing some of those key thoughts and concerns to the forefront. So as I shared before, you hear me talk about students always first because of my personal experience, and I don't shy away from saying that it wasn't always the best experience for me. Hence
Hmm.
why I always want to think about the experience for students and their families.
Yeah.
So when you're asking the question about assessment, this is the first time for all of us in a global pandemic. And so there's no playbook around this.
Yeah.
One of our adages in the district is heart work.
Mm.
And I have impressed upon the staff constantly that we lead with our heart. And during this time of a global pandemic, humanity and our humanity has to be at the forefront of all communications and all interactions.
Mm.
So what we're doing is we are racing. RACE is an acronym that we use in the Asbury Park School District. It's review, reflect, assess, create, and execute. So when you talk about grading, it's not really about grading right now.
Okay.
It can't be about grading right now for us and for, I would venture to say, any district really, because what are you grading? Are you grading students' circumstances? Are you
Mm.
grading their families' lives? Are you grading the factors that they're growing up in? Are we grading the parents' educational background? Are we grading the fact that parents have to work 2 jobs during a global pandemic and it places them on the forefront of being the most vulnerable in terms of exposure to the virus and therefore not available to educate their children in this remote learning space? See, what are you grading? And so it's about feedback. It's about lessons learned. It's about how do we pivot from a brick and mortar experience in a day and push instruction into the homes of our children and our families that are already vulnerable and have now become more vulnerable. Some of my students in the secondary level are on the front lines right now. They have to work. They don't
Mm.
have an option. This notion of sheltering in place is not a privilege that's afforded to them
Yeah.
because they have to work. And so when people say, well, you're being very lenient, why aren't you grading them? What am I grading? I'm grading teenagers that lack the privilege of sheltering in place because they have to work and serve their communities, because they have to put food on the table, because they have to help parents who may have lost their jobs during this global pandemic. So to answer your question, we have a do no harm grading procedure in place. And so we are providing continuous instruction. We provide every support possible. We have attendance officers that actually deliver food and instructional packets to porches, to doorways, to doorsteps.
Hmm.
And so we have teachers that make phone calls and try to navigate students and parents through those packets. But at the end of the day, we know that our community has been impacted. We know that there are social and emotional factors that are impacting those families. Our families are depressed. So we want to bring some levity, some life, and some light to those dark places. And that's why I mentioned before that we have meditation moments, we have some yoga instruction. We constantly push out on our website resources for our families. We know that school oftentimes is a sanctuary for our children, and they're not able to come to school now. So they're
Mm.
dealing with a lot. A lot of things are happening that we can't control, that we don't have eyes on, that we can't call other agencies in to support our children. And so when we talk about this idea of grading, I always ask the question, grading what? What are we really grading? And so we are learning lessons. We are learning lessons on those digital inequities, hence the reason why we went and we have reflected using our continuous improvement model, right? So we've reflected on how to better serve our students through what we call synchronous instruction. Hence, we purchased the tablets. So we have a plan for moving from remote learning into this virtual learning.
Once again, we are with Sancha K.Gray, the superintendent of Asbury Park School District, and a woman who is called for a time such as this. I can't tell you how, I mean, some of the things that you've told me have given me chills, only because, you know, we've generally dealt with this stoic kind of cutthroat, I want to get to the results. And I'm just so thankful that the leadership of Asbury Park right now is in unbelievably phenomenal hands, not only because of, you know, the work that you put in from a foundational standpoint with literacy, but also as it relates to the work you've done on a national effort with public speaking. It shows, you know, that you have worked with the International Center for Leadership and Education. You've gone down to DC and you've presented on the moral imperative, the need for interventions. And we're seeing that right now in the work that you're doing. Intervention, having the right folks intervening at the crux of the matter. I want to shift here as we close to hearing a success story. If there's any success stories that you have right now, or anything that's kind of touched your heart in these past couple of months that you can speak to, is there anything you want to share and give us a light of hope right now?
Well, our biggest light, if you will, of hope, our flicker of hope exists in our ability to provide those digital, to close the digital inequities through the provision of the tablets. For us, that is really going to make such a pivotal change in how instruction is delivered. And I focused a lot on talking about the students, but I don't do this work in isolation. I have a wonderful team of staff members and educators that don't only hold the title of teacher. So I have custodial engineers, I have security officers who understand that performance, passion, and purpose, which are our three pillars that govern what we do. They see themselves as a part of that commitment to our students and our families. And so for me, those would be the major takeaways I would want people to understand about the Asbury Park School District. It's not that I, in isolation as a superintendent, am able to do this, but it's the team that comes together around understanding our purpose and what that means in the lives of our children and our families and our community. And so it's in that spirit that we are able to continue to provide the experiences that we do for our children.
Wonderful, wonderful. We're going to close out here, but before we leave, I believe in wisdom and advice and counsel. You know, my background with faith-based is one that when we look at the Old Testament, when Solomon was asked by God what it is that he desired, he said, I want some wisdom. I'm going to tap into your wisdom right now and ask if there's a tip of advice or wisdom that you could share with educators right now, or folks who want to get into education. What would you say?
I know some amazing educators in our state and across this country, and it's nothing really new that I would say. There's nothing ultra profound about it other than remember for whom you sit in this seat and who you serve. You serve children.
Yeah.
And for me, it's always been about changing the trajectory of people's lives. And the lives that I immediately am responsible for are children. but ultimately it's the entire school community's lives that I feel an obligation to be that agent of change for. And so I always think about what experiences do I need to provide for my school community at large that will make a difference in changing their lives so that we can live a life of contribution, because it's through the life of contribution where others and the world become impacted.
Wow, this has been a phenomenal interview. We close out the show with the title of the show, Education Now. Um, in about a minute's worth or 2 minutes, if education now, what does education now mean to you?
In our new reality, education now means that we have to think differently. If there was a box, there can be no box. Our children are adaptable, they're moldable, they're malleable. And we have to create experiences for them for a world that we don't know what it looks like. We have to equip them with the skills that they're going to need to continue to persevere and be resilient, but also to access learning in such a new and different and fresh way. And so education now really has to focus on not just getting through a global pandemic, but it has to focus on creating a whole new system that has to be centered around this new reality that we're all going to be faced with.
Madam Superintendent, I want to thank you for your time on this wonderful Sunday afternoon, speaking with me about education. Thank you for joining us, and we're going to keep track of all that you're doing. We appreciate you. We applaud you. We encourage you. And audience, we want to thank you for joining us for Education Now. We'll see you next time. And remember, as always, school's in session.